As I studied the history of electricity, I started to wonder more and more, why do a third of the countries, including the United States, use around 110, 120 volts in their homes, and the other 2/3 use around 220, 230, 240 volts? I think I found the answers. It all has to do with how Edison first started working on electrical systems, Edison's three-wire system, the date of the invention of the tungsten incandescent light bulb, and a single United States city. No, I'm not talking about New York. I'm talking about Chicago. Ready? Let's go.
Electricity, 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 electricity.
I'd like to start on September 8th, 1878. That was when a 31-year-old Thomas Edison was brought by a friend to see an inventor named William Wallace, who made a special DC generator or dynamo that could light 8 very bright lamps at a time called arc lamps. According to a newspaper, Edison was enraptured, but decided that the lights were just too bright. Edison returned to his invention factory and declared that he could light 10,000 lights from one machine. And he declared, with 15 or 20 of these dynamo electric machines recently perfected by Mr. Wallace, I can light the entire lower part of New York City. However, Edison quickly learned that the Wallace Farmer dynamos were too inefficient to be useful. So he bought every generator he could find and cobbled together the best dynamo he could out of the best features of all the available generators. As the Wallace Farmer generator created 110 volts, Edison's new generator, called the long-legged Mary Ann because of the long legs of the electromagnets, was also designed to be at 110 volts. However, even with an efficient generator, it took Edison years to electrify anything on an industrial scale. In fact, it took almost 4 years from when Edison declared to the newspapers, quote, "I have it now," till he finally could mass produce an incandescent bulb and electrify businesses from a central electrical station. After turning on the power at the first electrical station, Edison started to notice that some of the customers on the more popular lines would use more lamps and therefore have more resistance, so that the popular lines would produce less light than the less popular ones. His solution was to use 2 DC generators in series, with a neutral wire between them. In this way, the current from one generator would flow out of the positive electrode to the negative electrode, and the current from the other generator would do the same, so that if the system is in balance, no current would run in the central neutral wire. But you can still connect between the live wire and the neutral wire to make a circuit for your lamp at 110 volts. If the system is out of balance, however, then there will be current running in the center wire. And Edison could measure that with a current meter and then rearrange the connections with a switch to bring the system back into balance so that all the lamps will be basically at the same brightness. In addition, by using this system, you can electrify with 3 wires what used to take 4. And as the center neutral wire has little or no current in it, it could be made with a very thin wire. In this way, Edison reduced the copper needed by 60%. In addition, if you needed more power for a motor, say, you could just connect the 2 live wires and get 220 volts instead of 110 volts, which is exactly what they did. The only metal filament that Edison could get to work in his bulb was made out of platinum, and that was too expensive to mass produce. So Edison used bamboo or carbonized cotton filaments, even though they would burn out at 220 volts. Edison's competitors used similar bulbs, so it became standardized to use 110 volts for the light bulbs and 220 volts for the motors. Then, in 1904, inventors named Sandor Just and Franjo Hahnemann filed a patent for a light bulb that used a metal tungsten, which not only lasted far longer, but it also could be used at far higher temperatures and voltages. Soon, several companies in Europe paid their customers to change all of their light bulbs to this new metal type so that they could transmit electricity at 220 volts. For everything. This was profitable because it was cheaper to make a transformer to step down to 220 volts, use less metal, than to step down to 110 volts. Also, the current would be less in the 220 volt even after the transformation, so that you could use thinner wires and transfer it longer distances from the transformer. In that way, most of Europe lighting went to 220 volts, and all the countries that were supplied by Europeans in Africa and Asia followed suit. However, in America, the need for incandescent bulbs was so high that they couldn't keep up, let alone replace all the old bulbs. For example, in 1909, 5 years after the invention of the tungsten bulb, 14 million metal lamps were manufactured, but the demand was so high that 53 million new carbon lamps that could only work up to 110 volts were sold as well. 10 years later, they had ramped up the manufacture of tungsten bulbs by a whopping 1,500%, which was finally enough to cover all their lighting needs. But by this time, there are too many electrical systems set up to change all of the transformers to 220. And so the American companies stuck with 110 volts, and all the countries serviced by American companies also stuck with 110 volts. Now you might wonder why America had so many light bulbs, and that has to do with the city of Chicago, which in the mid to late 1800s was the fastest growing city in the world. See, when Chicago was designated as a city in 1840, it was a pretty small town with a population of around 4,500. Then in 1847, a canal was built to connect the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River through Chicago, which caused the town to blossom to be a hub of transportation. 2 years later, gold was discovered in California, and a rush of people came from the East Coast to the West to try to strike it rich, many of them stopping in Chicago, and the meatpacking industry flourished. All of this and other factors, which I don't have time to get into, meant that by 1870, the population had increased to almost 300,000 souls with no end in sight. With this sudden population growth, houses were built fast and cheap with no big thought to hygiene or safety. That is when a cow kicked over a lamp, or maybe a cooking fire went out of control, and the entire downtown burned to the ground in what was called the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Suddenly, the architects of Chicago had a blank space to build, and build tall, as space was still at a premium, as the city was hemmed in by the lake, the river, and the rail yards, and there were still lots of people moving to the town. However, brick buildings are heavy and need ridiculously thick walls in order to build tall, and cast iron weaken in fire, which was obviously not very popular in Chicago. The architect who solved this problem was named William Jenney. The story, which might be made up, was that Jenney came home one night and his wife was reading a book, which he put on top of a birdcage to welcome her husband home. And Jenney came up with the ingenious idea of using a metal skeleton to hold up a building, just like the metal birdcage held up the book, and then have the walls be lighter as they are not load-bearing. This not only allowed people to build slightly bigger, but very tall. And in 1884, Jenney designed what is considered the world's first skyscraper with a 10-story tall home insurance building. And by 1893, Chicago had 12 skyscrapers between 16 and 20 stories tall, while New York only had 4 skyscrapers at this time, despite their far larger population. I mention 1893 in particular because that is when Chicago, after vigorous debate and a lot of bribes, ended up hosting the Columbian World's Exhibition. The fair had over 27 million visitors, most of whom were Americans, when the population of America was just 63 million. After the success of the fair, many industrialists decided it was a matter of city pride, as well as good product placement, to build a skyscraper in their hometown. By 1899, the United States had a whopping 62 skyscrapers, and the rest of the world combined only had 4. One in Japan, one in Netherlands, one in Australia, and one in the UK. And all of these skyscrapers had to be electrified, often with generators hidden in the basement, because they couldn't pipe gas to power their gas lamps to such great heights, or at least they couldn't do it safely. The fair was also influential because it was lit by alternating current, or AC electricity, by George Westinghouse. And with so many electric lights, it was the first fair that was successfully kept open at night. Soon, everyone wanted electric lights, especially businesses. Although this fair is often referred to as the end of the War of the Currents between AC and DC, the war had ended the year previously, and the general public was completely uncaring about AC versus DC, or 3-phase versus 2-phase versus single-phase for AC. They only cared about electric lights. So the fair was more of a win for electric lights rather than a win for AC over DC. Over the years, different electrical companies in different countries tried to sneak up the voltage so that they could save some money on their transformers. So that some countries have shifted from 110 to 120 or even 127 volts, or from 220 volts to 230 volts or 240 volts. The one exemption is Japan, which is the only country to actually lower the voltage to 100 volts out of concern about fire, the lowest voltage in the world. To add to the confusion, in 1891, a German company demonstrated something called 3-phase current to the world, where you have 3 live wires for long-distance transmission that are 120 degrees apart, where the lamps were connected in 3 branches to a single phase with a return line called a neutral line, which is connected to all 3 phases, or the ground. By the early 1920s, almost all electrical distribution systems use 3-phase AC, which we continue to use to this day. In the 1920s, each house got only 1 live or hot wire, 1 neutral wire, and sometimes a separate ground or earth wire. However, with the advent of high-power devices like clothing dryers, there's a push to electrify houses with 2 live or hot phases, so the dryer could be powered with 2 phases and have more power. Some places, the live wires are 120 degrees apart, so that the total voltage from the 2 wires is 1.72 times the voltage of an individual live wire. And some places, the live wires are 180 degrees apart, so the total voltage is 2 times the individual live wire. All of this leads to a dizzying array of power in your home, depending on the country, and sometimes in the same country. But all of this begs more questions. Why do some countries use 50 hertz and other countries use 60 hertz? And how exactly does 3-phase work? Why is it amazing, and why is it so amazingly confusing? Well, it all has to do with a truly underrated inventor named Michael Dobrowski. And that story is next time on The Lightning Tamers. Thanks for watching my video. Remember to give it a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe. Remember to put a comment. Do you think I got it right, or do you think I got it wrong? Extra big thank you to my Patreons. Thank you, Patreons. If you want to be thanked as well, there's a link down below. If you are interested in learning more about this, I am writing a book about it, and it is coming out soon-ish. So make sure to subscribe and follow me, and I will post my link to my book when it comes out, and you can be the first to read about it. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good day and stay safe out there. Okay, I'm gonna get this and then I'm gonna stop, okay? Thanks for watching my video. Please remember that when you give me a thumbs up and you subscribe and you share it on social media and you make a comment, I don't know, good things happen to you somewhere, or good things happen to me when you do that.